Game of Thrones never tells us what Jaqen is doing in King's Landing in Season 1, but there's one convincing theory I'd totally believe, if it wasn't for a minor detail that likely debunks it. Jaqen is introduced at the end of Game of Thrones' first season, as he's one of the prisoners that Euron is transporting to the wall. Seasons later, we learn that Jaqen is actually one of the faceless men from Braavos. However, Game of Thrones never fills us in on why the assassin was so far from home or how he became imprisoned. Given the skills that come with being a faceless man, many Game of Thrones fans believe that Jaqen intended to be put in the black cells. After all, it's difficult to see such a masterful assassin, one who could easily take on a new identity, being arrested and held against his will. And he must have been far from the House of Black and White for a reason. The most convincing suggestion would explain his time in the black cells, though there's one detail that makes it an unlikely answer. Littlefinger hiring Jaqen to kill Ned Stark is the most convincing theory about the character. It explains the assassin's whereabouts in Game of Thrones Season 1. There are several theories about why Jaqen was in King's Landing, but the most convincing is that Littlefinger hired him to kill Ned Stark. Ned Stark being Jaqen's target would explain why he's in the black cells at the end of Season 1. As that's where Ned is kept until his sentencing in Baelor, Jaqen would need to infiltrate the dungeons in order to reach him. And when you think about it, Littlefinger has a good reason for wanting Ned Stark dead. If he's sent to the wall, as Cersei Lannister intends, he'll be able to tell people about Littlefinger's betrayal. This would upend Littlefinger's plan to gain power in the Vale and the North, as the remaining Starks would be aware of his treachery. Ned has the power to turn many Westeros lords and ladies against Littlefinger. Therefore, it's in his best interests if Ned perishes after he's arrested. No one knows that Joffrey is going to take his head, so the only way to guarantee such an end would be to hire an assassin. Littlefinger has familial and professional ties to Braavos, too, but there's one thing that makes his involvement with Jaqen unlikely. One Song of Ice and Fire detail makes it hard to believe Littlefinger hired a faceless man. George R.R. Martin's books reveal the faceless men are costly. Aidan Gillen as Littlefinger on Game of Thrones. Although Littlefinger has a solid motive to assassinate Ned Stark, there's one problem with this Game of Thrones theory: he likely doesn't have the funds to hire one of the faceless men. When Robert Baratheon is trying to get rid of Daenerys Targaryen in the Song of Ice and Fire books, Grand Maester Pycelle suggests using one of the assassins to eliminate her. The idea is shot down by none other than Littlefinger, who reveals that they can't afford to use the faceless men. With the books establishing that they're costly, it's hard to see how Littlefinger himself could hire one. Although Littlefinger successfully rises above his station in Game of Thrones, there's no indication he has the gold to hire a faceless man, something even the Crown isn't capable of. This fact is often overlooked when discussing the possibility of him working with Jaqen. It's hard to see Littlefinger going to such lengths to kill Ned, when there are likely other ways he could take out House Stark's patriarch. So, the cost of hiring Jaqen likely renders this Game of Thrones theory false, though it's possible someone else did it. Could Jaqen have still been in King's Landing to kill Ned Stark? There are a couple of ways it's still possible. Jaqen says goodbye to Arya in Game of Thrones. Although the price of the faceless men seemingly debunks the theory that Littlefinger hired one, it's still possible that Ned was Jaqen's target. Littlefinger isn't the only person who has reasons to want Ned gone, and there are wealthier people who could have orchestrated his assassination. Cersei Lannister tries to send Ned to the wall, but it's possible she wants him to die in a more subtle manner, something Joffrey makes impossible. Tywin Lannister could also be responsible for Jaqen being in King's Landing, as he'd go to great lengths to kill his family's enemies. Given that Littlefinger knows the cost of the faceless men, it's also possible he's had dealings with them. Although he doesn't have gold, some Game of Thrones fans have speculated that the faceless men demand a more personal price from those hiring them, via Reddit. However, Littlefinger's words suggest that they deal in gold rather than more obscure payments. And even if they did ask for something more meaningful, Littlefinger could have found an easier means of killing Ned before he went to the wall. Therefore, he probably doesn't have anything to do with Jaqen.